Did you ever had that eerie feeling that someone or something was watching you? You're not alone. Before we uncover the terrifying truth, like this video and comment your location. Let's step into the shadows together. I never wanted to tell this story. Even narrating it now makes my hands shake so badly I can barely tell. But after seeing the news report yesterday about another teacher going missing, I have no choice. People need to know what happened. Maybe it will save someone else. I was 23 when I got my first teaching job at Riverside Elementary in northern Maine. Fresh out of college, eager to make a difference, and completely unprepared for what would unfold during that bitter February of 2019. The trouble started with a Valentine's card. In retrospect, I should have noticed something was off about it immediately. But when you're dealing with 34th graders exchanging cards and candy, details tend to blur together. It wasn't until I was cleaning up after the class party that I really looked at it. The card had been placed on my desk, separate from the pile of store-bought cards my students had exchanged. The paper was thick, almost like cardstock, but had an odd texture that reminded me of dried leather. The heart drawn on the front wasn't the cheerful red you'd expect. It was drawn in a deep, rusty brown that had cracked and flaked in places. Inside, instead of the usual childish scrawl, the message was written in perfect calligraphy. My dearest Miss Andrews, your heart beats 67 times each minute. I've counted. With deepest affection, your secret admirer. I remember laughing it off at first, assuming it was a prank from one of the other teachers. But that night, alone in my small apartment, something about the card kept nagging at me. How would anyone know my exact heart rate? And that texture. I found myself taking the card out of my bag, running my fingers over its surface again. That's when I noticed the smell. Subtle at first, but unmistakable once you caught it. The metallic tang of blood. I dropped the card and called the police. They took it as evidence, but seemed skeptical of my concerns. Probably just some kid trying to be creepy, the officer said with a shrug. We'll look into it. The next day, I noticed Timothy, one of my quieter students, watching me intently during class. He'd always been a bit odd, brilliant at art, but struggled to connect with his peers. When I caught his eye, he didn't look away like most kids would. He smiled, and something about that smile made my skin crawl. After class, I found another card on my desk, same texture, same brown ink. Your heart rate increases to 82 beats per minute when you're nervous. Like now, I can hear it from here. I whirled around, but the classroom was empty. The windows were closed, the door shut. Yet somehow, I could have sworn I heard breathing that wasn't my own. The police were more interested this time, but their investigation hit a wall. The cards showed traces of human blood, but it was too degraded for DNA testing. They installed a camera in my classroom, interviewed students and staff, but found nothing conclusive. The cards kept coming. Every day, a new one, each more disturbing than the last. They began including details about my private life, what I'd had for dinner, what time I'd gone to bed, conversations I'd had on the phone with my mother. Timothy's behavior grew stranger. He started drawing pictures of hearts in art class, not cartoon hearts, but anatomically correct ones, rendered in disturbing detail. When I asked him about them, he said they were studies. His smile never reached his eyes. One night, unable to sleep, I decided to do some research. I found an article about Timothy's family from 3 years ago. His father, a surgeon, had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The police suspected foul play, but no body was ever found. Timothy's mother had moved them here for a fresh start. The next day, Timothy was absent. When I called his mother to check on him, her voice was strange, distant. He's not feeling well, she said. He's been in his room all day working on his Valentine collection. That night, I woke to the sound of paper sliding under my apartment door. Heart pounding, I approached the entrance. There on the floor was a card, the paper still warm, as if it had been freshly made. Inside was a photo of me, asleep in my bed, taken just hours ago. On the back, in that same perfect calligraphy. I learned from the best, you know. Daddy taught me everything about hearts before he left. Would you like to see my collection? I've been practicing. I moved schools the next week, relocated to a different state, changed my name. Sometimes I still wake up in a cold sweat, thinking I hear the sound of paper sliding under my door. Every Valentine's Day, I check my heart rate obsessively, terrified it might match the numbers in those cards. Last week, I received a letter at my new address. Inside was a clipping from the local paper back in Maine. Timothy's mother had finally reported him missing. According to the article, all they found in his room was an extensive collection of Valentine cards, each made from what appeared to be treated human skin, and a set of surgical tools that had belonged to his father. The paper included a school photo of Timothy. In it, he's smiling that same cold smile, and his eyes seem to stare right through the photograph, as if he knows exactly where I am. I've started hearing breathing again at night. I never thought I'd be desperate enough to try dating apps, but after my fiancé left me 3 months before our wedding, I was in a dark place. February 2022 was approaching, and the thought of spending another Valentine's Day alone was unbearable. That's how I ended up matching with David. His profile seemed perfect: 32, successful architect, kind eyes, and a genuine smile. We chatted for weeks before agreeing to meet. He was charming, funny, and seemed to know exactly what to say to make me feel comfortable. In hindsight, maybe that should have been my first warning sign. We planned our first date for Valentine's Day. I know, cliché, but he insisted it would be special. He said he had a surprise planned, something unique that would make all my dreams come true. Those were his exact words. The restaurant he chose was in a part of Chicago I didn't know well, tucked away in a renovated industrial district. As I parked my car, I noticed how empty the area was. No other restaurants, no shops, just abandoned warehouses with dark windows that seemed to watch me as I walked to the entrance. The restaurant itself was beautiful, all exposed brick and warm lighting. David was already there, looking even better than his photos. He stood to greet me with a hug that lasted a beat too long, his cologne overwhelming my senses. "I took the liberty of ordering for us both," he said, pulling out my chair. "I hope you don't mind. I wanted everything to be perfect." The food was exquisite, though I couldn't quite identify all the flavors. David watched me eat with an intensity that made me slightly uncomfortable, barely touching his own plate. He asked questions about my life, my dreams, my fears, normal first date conversation, but something about his focus felt hungry. After dinner, he insisted on showing me the surprise. "It's just upstairs," he said, gesturing to a door near the back. "The owner's an old friend. He lets me use the space for my art." I hesitated, but the wine had dulled my usual caution. Besides, we were in a public place, right? The stairwell was dark, lit only by emergency exit signs that cast everything in a sickly red glow. David's hand on my lower back guided me up, his touch growing firmer when I slowed. The second floor was a large open space, filled with what looked like life-size dolls, posed in various scenarios. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I realized with growing horror that they weren't dolls at all. They were people, preserved somehow, dressed in elegant clothes and arranged like a twisted art gallery. "Beautiful, aren't they?" David's voice had changed, losing its warmth. Each one a perfect moment of connection, preserved forever. No more awkward goodbyes, no more heartbreak, no more being left at the altar. I turned to run, but he was blocking the stairs. "How did you—" I stammered, backing away. He smiled, and in the red light, it looked like his face was melting. "Know about your fiancé?" "Oh, Sarah, I know everything about you. I've been watching you for months. Your ex did you a favor, really. You deserve something more. Permanent." That's when I noticed the tools laid out on a table nearby. Surgical instruments, chemicals, preservation equipment. Next to them was a dress, my size, still in the garment bag from the boutique where I'd returned my wedding gown. "You'll be my masterpiece," he whispered, moving closer. "The centerpiece of my Valentine's collection. We'll be together forever." I don't remember conscious thought after that, just pure survival instinct. I grabbed the closest thing I could find, a heavy metal picture frame, and swung it at his head. He stumbled, surprised by the resistance, and I ran. The stairs were a blur, my heels echoing on the metal steps. I could hear him behind me, calling my name in that same gentle voice he'd used over dinner. The main floor was dark now, the restaurant empty. Had it ever really been open? I made it to my car, hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I sped away, I saw David standing in the street watching me go. He was still smiling. The police found the building empty the next day. No restaurant, no artwork, no preserved people, just dust and debris in an abandoned warehouse. They discovered that David's profile had been deleted, and the photos he'd used belonged to a man who died 5 years ago. But that's not the worst part. Last week, I received a small package in the mail. Inside was a flash drive and a note, a preview of our future together. The drive contained hundreds of photos, me at work, at home, sleeping, dating other men. The final image was a detailed sketch of me, posed like his other artwork, wearing the wedding dress he'd saved. The photos are still being taken. I see flashes sometimes, from windows, from cars, from crowds. The police say they're doing everything they can, but how do you catch someone who might not even exist? Tomorrow is Valentine's Day again. I've boarded up my windows and padlocked my doors, but I know he'll find a way in. He always does. This morning, I found a business card for a restaurant I've never heard of, tucked under my door. The address is in my neighborhood. Working the night shift at Pine Grove Long-Term Care Facility wasn't anyone's idea of a dream job, but it paid well and fit with my graduate school schedule. Besides, most nights were quiet. Just me, the elderly residents, and the occasional visit from Dr. Matthews, the night physician. Everything changed the week before Valentine's Day 2023. It started with the roses, perfect blood-red blooms appearing in random rooms throughout the facility. At first, we assumed they were from residents' families, getting an early start on the holiday. But when I checked the visitor logs, something felt off. No deliveries were recorded, and none of the families mentioned sending flowers. The roses had an odd quality to them. Their scent was too sweet, almost cloying, and they never seemed to wilt. Mrs. Peterson in room 203 claimed they whispered to her at night, but given her advanced dementia, we didn't think much of it. Then the cards started appearing. Each one was handwritten in elegant script, addressed to different residents. The messages were disturbing. They referenced private moments, intimate details that only someone with constant access to the residence would know. One mentioned how beautiful Mrs. Johnson looked while sleeping. Another praised Mr. Roberts' peaceful expression during his afternoon naps. The administrators called a staff meeting. No one admitted to leaving the gifts, and the security cameras showed nothing, just static during the times the roses and cards would have been delivered. That's when residents started reporting strange dreams. They all described the same figure, a tall, thin person in white, standing at the foot of their beds, watching them sleep. The figure would lean down, as if to kiss them, but always vanished before making contact. I might have dismissed it as mass hysteria if I hadn't seen it myself. It was during my rounds on February 13th. I was checking on Mr. Chen in room 215 when I caught a glimpse of something in the mirror, a reflection of someone standing behind me, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned doctor's coat. When I turned, nothing was there, but the room filled with the overwhelming scent of roses. Later that night, I found a card on the nurse's station desk, addressed to me. My dearest caregiver, your dedication to these precious souls is admirable, but don't you think they deserve a more permanent rest? A final Valentine's gift, perhaps, with eternal devotion. The handwriting matched the other cards perfectly. I took the card to Dr. Matthews, but his reaction wasn't what I expected. He went pale, muttering something about impossible and he's back. When I pressed him for answers, he told me a story that made my blood run cold. 50 years ago, Pine Grove had employed a doctor named Marcus Thorne. He had been brilliant but unstable, obsessed with the concept of preserving love through death. He believed that by ending his patients' lives at moments of peace or joy, he was giving them the ultimate gift, freedom from suffering and eternal preservation of their happiest moments. When the bodies of several elderly patients were found surrounded by roses, Dr. Thorne disappeared. The only clue was a Valentine left at each bedside, promising to return when he found a worthy successor to continue his work. I didn't sleep that night, spending extra time checking on each resident. Everything seemed normal until I reached Mrs. Peterson's room. The roses by her bed had multiplied, covering every surface. their sweet scent making me dizzy. And there, standing by her bedside, was a figure in white. It turned slowly to face me, and I saw that what I'd thought was a face was actually a crude mask made of what looked like dried rose petals. Through the eye holes, I caught a glimpse of something dark and hungry. "They're so peaceful when they sleep," it whispered in a voice that sounded like rustling leaves. "Don't you want to preserve that peace forever? Join me, be my Valentine. Together, we could give them all the gift of eternal rest." I ran, locking myself in the medication room and calling security. By the time they arrived, the figure was gone, along with all the roses. Mrs. Peterson was unharmed, but clutching a new card that read, "Soon, my love. Soon." The facility installed new security systems and increased staff coverage, but nothing showed up on the cameras. The roses stopped appearing, and slowly, life returned to normal. I convinced myself it had been stress, lack of sleep, maybe someone's sick idea of a prank. Until today. I just finished my shift and found a final card waiting in my locker. Inside was a pressed rose petal and a message. "My dearest student, your resistance only proves your worthiness. The gift of love requires sacrifice. I've waited 50 years for someone like you. This Valentine's Day, we'll create our masterpiece together. All the residents, all that peace, preserved forever. I'll be waiting. With eternal devotion, M." Below the signature was a perfect impression of the rose petal mask I'd seen that night, stamped in what looks disturbingly like dried blood. My next shift is tonight, Valentine's Day. I should call in sick, quit, run away. But I keep thinking about the residents, helpless in their beds. Someone needs to protect them. The roses are already starting to appear in the empty rooms, their sweet scent drifting down the hallways. And in my pocket, the card burns like ice, a promise or a threat. Together, we'll make this Valentine's Day last forever.